Good afternoon. This is August 30th, 2025, and we're here at the Evansville War Maritime Museum, and we're here with a gentleman named Shelby Lynn. Shelby, can you say your name and then spell your whole name and tell me your birthday, please?
Shelby is spelled S-H-E-L-B-Y, A for Allen, A-L-A-N, and Lynn, L-Y-N-N, and my birthday is April the 20th, 1937.
And where'd you go to grade school and high school?
Went to the old Scott School, grade school, it's not there anymore, and then we were bused into Wrights High School.
That whole district bussed everybody over to Wrights, even though you sort of weren't their district.
Due to the FHA, the farmers, FHA, or FFA, Future Farmers of America. So people out in the county, Armstrong, Scott Township, Armstrong, German Township, the farmers, you know, that was, well, in fact, people even from east were taken to Wrights because that was the only school that offered the FFA instruction.
And Arthur Hart was from up in your area. You probably didn't remember him. He drove buses over to Wrights, but he was right up in your area. Okay, so we're born in 37, and so World War II started December 8, 1941. So why don't you tell me who else was in your house and what your dad did, what your mom did, and you had an older brother and any other siblings. Tell us, start with your dad. Tell us what he did, and tell us what he did in the war, and where he was born, and where he went to school.
Okay, my father's name was Thurman Gerald Lynn, and he was born, I think in Arlington, Kentucky, but he grew up in Howell, out on the west side. And he went to Wrights, but, and my mother, her name was Mary Elizabeth, her maiden name was Dench. And they went to Wrights, but during the Depression, he had lost his job at the railroad. He cleaned engines, and so they ended up out in Englefield because my mother's aunt lived out there, and they had a house available for them to live in. But times were really rough. But then my dad worked, until the war, he worked at Seeger Sunbeam, but then when the war came, he worked at the shipyard.
And tell us what he did on the shipyard.
He told you. Yeah, he worked in what he called valve repair. And one thing he told me that he came up with the idea of mixing the water with sand to sandblast the hulls of the LSTs to clean them before they painted them. So that was, but he back then I recall he worked swing shift. He'd work first and maybe second and third and so forth.
But back to when he lived in Howell. Howell was right by our L&N station, so my family and a lot of families made their living from the L&N train. But in 1929 to 1941, we had as high as 15% unemployment, so that hit the railroad industry as well as others. But he worked on the train. There was a big rounder over there. Yeah. And he worked in the rounder probably and worked on the engine. They were all steam engines at that time. Yeah. So then he moved, like happened to many people. They moved where there was land or some food or farming. He moved to his wife's, your mama's. Mm-hmm. What's your mama's first name?
Mary Elizabeth. They called her Elizabeth. That was her name she went by.
And then then he went out there and lived at her family's house.
Yeah, it was her aunt and uncle's home there, where we moved into. At one time it used to be a tavern and a pool hall, and it was what you call a shotgun house. It's not there anymore, but it was 3 rooms in line, and that's where I was born.
Give us the cross streets.
Well, it faced Englefield Road, and it was between Railroad Street and Martin Road.
So you were, we will show you this on a picture right here. Michael, show us it.
Here's Evansville Regional Airport. Here's Highway 41. If you go north on 41, and this is where the 4-H Center's at, but then you go up the next light beyond there, and you go to the west. That's the little little town of Inglefield, and it's centered around the railroad line that runs parallel to Highway 41. Okay, and here's a blown up of where he grew up. So here's Highway 41. Here's currently where there's Sigma, used to be PPG. If you turn here on Inglefield Road, head west, you cross the railroad tracks, and this little grouping of houses right here. Inglefield used to actually be all around on both sides of the railroad track, but now you just have laid out streets on this side. But his, you'll see there's a house here, but where it was talking about the small shotgun house, that was tore down, but it would be about right here. Okay, Mr. Lynn's going to talk about a incident where some test pilots crashed, and when he talks about where the tail landed in a kennel over here, it would be right here. He grew up here, backside of Inglefield, it'd be over this direction, and then the rest of the plane would have landed next to the railroad tracks for over in this direction, about right here. Okay, and then the other plane, since it was two planes collided, the other plane went into a barn over in this area. So you have Highway 41 here, Ascension, St. Vincent is right here, and then Old State Road runs around here. This used to be Old 41. But in this area, roughly, is where the other plane crashed.
Shows where the other part of the other plane is, again, just so rehash.
Yeah, so you're right here, one of the planes, pieces of it was right in here, and then the other one was more intact but crashed into a barn in this area.
Okay.
I don't know what day of the week it was, but it was morning, and my mother and my older brother and I, we were having breakfast, so, you know, it's probably 8 o'clock or so, and we heard this crash or explosion, loud noise, and we ran out the back door, and what I remember, what I saw up in the air were two P-47s. One had crashed in to the rear of the other plane, and at what I saw them, they were like suspended in midair. And of course, we learned later, I did not see it, we learned later that the tail fell into a dog kennel area, and I assume that the plane that lost the tail was the one that went into the bank on the railroad track, whereas the other plane was mainly intact other than what damage to the engine. That's the one that went into the barn on the east side of 41. I don't know, the pilots bailed out. I did not see them bail out, but I would say they had to be between 1,000 and 2,000 feet up, because I didn't learn this till later, many years later, being with Whirlpool down in Fort Smith. The director of quality, Lawson Colonel, and I were talking, and he told me about being an inspector at Republic Aviation during the war. And then I recounted the story of the two planes hitting, and he knew the incident, and he knew the pilots. And he told me they were screwing around up in the sky, and the one came out of the clouds. It was sort of puffy clouds, and he didn't know where the other one was, and he hit him. And then he said they both parachuted out, and they landed over on 41, which was just it was just a 2-lane road, and they apparently, I guess they packed up their parachute and they hitched a ride back to Evansville. And I thought that was really, really unusual. And of course, the other thing that I remember, Evansville sent a fire truck out, and it had to go down the railroad track to get and put the fire out. And of course, a good friend of mine that was raised about a mile north to northwest, he remembers hearing the explosion, which would probably have been the plane blowing up when it hit the railroad track, and they saw the black smoke from the burning, you know. And so that's essentially what I remember, but I can still recall looking up and seeing like those planes suspended in air, you know.
Can you tell us what the smoke was like, what the sound was like? What did it sound like? Because you're outside it when they hit. And how far away it was? 10 miles or a mile or 100 yards?
Well, we were eating breakfast when the planes hit.
What did that sound like? Just the planes?
Well, you know, it's been 80-something years. I can't.
But what
But it was
normal?
it was enough to get our attention because we ran outside. Now, I don't know if, see, my mother and my brother, I never did sit down and really talk with them, whether they saw the tail come off of the plane or not, or if they saw the pilots parachute out. But I do, the picture that I have in mind were the two planes sitting up there, so.
How high up was that? You can't judge the distance, but it was.
I would say it had to be between 1,000, 2,000 feet, because they had to be high enough for their parachutes to open, you know?
And then the engine and the part of the plane hit near the railroad track, so it sort of hit a little mountain at the railroad track. What'd that look like to you in the smoke and the sound? Because that wasn't very, how far was that from your house?
They didn't let anybody go down there. You had to see it from a distance. So all you saw was a lot of smoke and fire and all. See.
Did you hear it or feel it when it hit?
I don't recall the sound of the plane hitting the railroad track or blowing up. All I remember is the sound was enough to get us up from our breakfast table and run outside because, well, we didn't know what it was, you know. You know, for all I know, it could have been a train that hit a car or something like that, see.
That's so very rare for anybody to witness a plane hitting another plane. That's pretty rare to see
I don't
that.
know that there was anybody else around that ran out and saw it. I never did talk with anyone that did see the same thing, you know.
And then the tail hit a dog house. Tell us, you went down to the kennel house before. What did that kennel look like?
The tail fell into Garmin. People, my name was Garmin, they had a dog kennel that they kept dogs, and that had been there for years. And all I know is it said the tail fell into Garmin's dog kennel, but I didn't hear of any animals that got hurt or anything. So where exactly it landed, what part of the tail, I don't know. The fact that the plane burned up, the only thing that was left was a wing that showed there, see, so I don't know if the rudder, the ailerons, or what was taken off of the plane, see.
And then your friend, I want to name the guy in Arkansas, what was his name that was the person inspector? Give his full name.
His name was Lawson, I think it was spelled Lawson, Colonel, Curnel.
Okay, and he was an inspector at that time.
Yeah, he was
He is listed in a document in the archives.
Okay, so he's in our archives. Now tell us about this other guy named Mann and spell his name out. And he was north of you by New Salem Church.
Yeah. We grew up together. His first name is Harold, Harold, and the last name is Mann. It's spelled Mann.
And what did he say he heard at that crash time? Because he told you something.
Well, what they heard at home, they heard the explosion. It had to be the plane blowing up when it went into the side of the, the side of the bank of the railroad track. And he said, well, then he saw the black smoke. So that's what he saw. He probably would not have heard the two planes hitting together. You know, somebody said, well, you know, if you took a plane and run it into another one, it's out of metal with the prop turning, you know, fast, you can imagine probably a lot of grinding sound, but it was enough to get us up, you know, run outside and look up, see what was going on.
Well, the thing is, before you heard all this information, did you and your brother and your mother think that that pilot could have been killed in that pilot crash? Because you didn't know at that time.
We didn't know.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you know, I look back now, and I don't know, I never wondered what happened to the pilots, but it may have been when I was talking with Lawson Colonel in Fort Smith. He's probably the one that told me they bailed out and landed on 41 and packed up their chutes and hitchhiked, thumbed a car ride back to Evansville to the airport.
Yeah.
Now, he also told me that one of the young pilots that flew in that plane later lost his life, that one of the planes, he flew into the ground at the Evansville airport. I guess I don't know what he was doing, but he didn't pull up, you know.
We're going to talk about the 4 planes that had crashed in the P-47, but Mike's going to show us pictures of this at this point. first the plane that hit the railroad tracks south of your house, maybe a block.
We think this of the crash site of the one, because it's railroad tracks, and we're assuming this is the one at Inglefield. And then
Right south of Shelby's house, probably with
a
less.
couple 100 yards, 300 yards,
Okay.
something like that,
Okay.
you know. And then this next photo would be most likely the one, and we don't know whether this is the actual crash site in terms of what the plane looked like when it hit the ground, or whether it's been pulled out of the barn that's sort of shown there to the right. But you can see obviously it was somewhat intact, but you can see the front of the wings have a lot of damage to it, like it came down and hit. So these were two photos of crash site. So we're speculating that these were the two that were related to this incident.
So, Shelby, out of 6,200 plus planes we made here, everybody had to have a test pilot, and it looks like you saw the crash of two planes, or the parts of two planes, and we only had two other real crashes, probably from P-47.
Yeah, we think there was one. There was one that went into the ground. I think up by Princeton was one, and then there was another one I believe that crashed either. I think it was on takeoff here at the airport. That at least were associated with test flying planes coming out of the Republic factory. I think there was other couple crashes from the modification center at some point in time, but those are the ones, and I'm sure they're documented up there in our archives. We'll have to take a look at that.
Did anybody die that you know of any of these test pilots? It was the one you said ran into the ground.
Yeah,
he
the
was
one
one of these
Princeton.
other pilots that got loose here. But
Yeah, the one up in Princeton, I think that was a fatality, and then on the modification center, the one over in Illinois, I think that was a fatality.
Well,
also.
been at least, what, 3 maybe?
Something like that, yeah.
okay.
Well, in addition, like I said earlier, that I saw a number of P-47s lined up. Likewise, on the opposite side of 41, in the railroad area, which was Wansford Yard, there was a section that I saw tanks running up back and forth, and I understand that these tanks were brought in and sort of rebuilt. And all, of course, they used the railroad to bring them in and ship them out. But I remember, and probably hearing the tanks running, along the road. But that's, I never did, with my dad down at the shipyard, I never did get down there. Of course, I would imagine there'd be really high security in that area. Wouldn't let
You never
pedestrians in.
you never got in the shipyard on the weekend,
No,
never drove
no.
by it. It was lit up at night, but because he worked there, you weren't really thinking you were allowed. It was top secret.
Right, right.
Okay.
All right, we want to talk about my wife. Her name, we were married 66 years. She's deceased now this past March. But my wife's maiden name was Alice, A-L-I-C-E, middle initial H, and her maiden name was Mann, M-A-N-N. And she was born January the 2nd, 1936. She was about 1 year and 4 months older than I. She grew up in Armstrong Township, went to Armstrong School, which is it's a corner of Baseline and Highway 65. And then, of course, then she was bused into Wrights High School. But we grew up in the same church, Salem Church at Darmstadt. So that's where we knew one another and all. But anyway, she had an experience relating to the P-47s, and she said when she was a young girl, and she would have been, 43, 44, she would have been maybe 9 or 10. But the pilots would come out in that area because it was fairly flat, and they would always run out and wave at them. And I think she commented that she could see the pilots. They were that low and that close. And of course, her mother was always yelling at them to quit encouraging them on that sort of thing. So that's what she knew about relative her experience relating to the P-47s.
It probably scared like farm animals too. Doesn't that close to the house?
Well, she never commented on the farm animals.
And then where were you married?
Her farm was located probably a couple of miles south of I-64, and about 6 or 8 miles northwest of Evansville.
And,
Or not of Evansville, of Englefield, excuse me.
and where did you get married, and did you volunteer at that church?
Oh, yeah, we were raised unique. Alice and I were baptized, confirmed, and married in Salem. Back then, it was United Church of Christ, the north side of Darmstadt. And we were married in '58.
And when did it change names?
Well, it went from the Evangelical and Reformed to the United Church of Christ around 1958. And then later on, there were some issues that caused us to remove ourselves from the United Church of Christ. So we're an independent church now, but it's still there and it's very active. It's referred to now as Salem Church of Darmstadt.
But a United Church of Methodists, they're one of the biggest percentage of populations in the United States in the Evansville area, so.
Well, this wasn't Methodist.
Wasn't, it was United Church of Christ. No, I didn't mean Methodist.
Yeah.
United Church of Christ is one of the highest concentrations in the
Yeah,
Evansville.
when we went from the Evangelical and Reformed to United Church of Christ, the United Church of Christ is strong out on the West Coast and the East Coast. And that's when it was pulled together in 1958.
It was like 2010, was it around there, 2008, 2010?
When we
left and just went
disassociated ourselves
It was
with
around
the
that time.
church.
Yeah, a lot of things happening. So you raised your kids through that church, and any of your other relatives go to that church, or just you and your wife?
Yeah, pretty well. Alice's mother and father were longtime members of that, and her one brother went there, but they were raised. The rest of them were raised over in. Well, they grew up. Her brothers and sisters, Alice's brothers and sisters, were all confirmed at our church, you know, and also families.
Now, your wife did a lot of volunteer work and a lot of other things. Can you just speak to that?
Well, her volunteer work was mainly at church. She was referred to as the church historian. She was very instrumental in the 100th anniversary and the 125th anniversary of the church. And of course, she and I both taught Sunday school for quite a few years. And then she was treasurer of the Women's Guild for 30 years and very active in that.
So at night, how much did she work on that history? Because that's a never-ending job to find all that. And how did she find, I mean, to do 100 to 125 years of history, she had to dig through a lot of records. Where did she find all her records, and where did she get to do all that?
Well, she did quite a bit of interviewing with a lot of the older members that are deceased now. And she found that out. And she had some audio recordings. And one of our previous ministers, Reverend Herman Arns, that was there in the 50s, in fact, they married us, he had put together a book called The Tale of Two Cities, referencing Englefield and Darmstadt and how they grew up, and so, you know, and all. So, anyway.
Who was your wife's teacher to teach her how to write a history book? Was it you or somebody else, or did she learn on her own?
She learned on her own. I didn't really, I can't say that I contributed much to it.
Yeah. That's very important for the church and important for the history of the Englefield, Darmstadt area.
Right.
Because Darmstadt's one of our oldest communities. Not your church, there's a Lutheran church a mile from you that dates way back. It's called the Trail that went from, there's another Lutheran church called Jonas, or what is it, the other Lutheran church that's on the trail that cuts through that area. And so a lot of Lutherans were there. And Bossy, mayor of Evansville, was a member of one of those churches. It's
off the Red Bank Trail?
Yeah, off the Red Bank Trail. The Red Bank Trail all the
Highway
way.
65, basically.
And it went all the way down into Evansville on the west side near the hilltop.
Yeah,
But that trail was very important, and there's a Lutheran church east of the Highway 4, they have Jonas Fish Fry there.
Yeah.
That's Emmanuel Lutheran.
Right.
And then the other Lutheran, it's right by you, is very old too, and that was on
Trinity
that
Lutheran.
Trinity, that's right on that trail. So very historical, but she did a little more of the Salem church, but it involved a lot of that history around there, which is very deep and very old period of time.
Oh, yeah. When my mother and dad moved out to Englefield in the little house, it was owned by my mother's uncle, Walter Schneider, W-A-L-T-E-R, and Schneider, S-C-H-N-E-I-D-E-R. And he was a lifelong member in that area where he grew up. And he worked for the L&N Railroad. He was a telegraph operator.
CE&I. CE&I Railroad, I think.
C&E-I Railroad or L&N?
Excuse me, C&E-I Railroad.
What's that stand for?
Central and Eastern Illinois.
Okay,
Yeah,
it's very
C&E-I.
common. Here's one of the 4 railroads that he had ever.
Yeah, that's right, C&E-I. Well, see, when he was real young, at age of 13, he was a telegraph operator up at Stacer, which is north of Evansville. But then during the war, he was a telegraph operator in a small building off of 41. As you head down 41 now and you exit off of the main highway to Morgan Avenue, off to the right where it was part of Wansford Yard, there was a small building that he occupied, and he worked 3rd shift on that. And he parked his 41 black Ford down below, and he came out one morning, this is during the wartime, and his car was up on concrete blocks, and all 4 wheels were gone, tires and all. But he says he was able to, because of the seriousness of his job and all, he was able to get new wheels and tires on that. And of course, he was a veteran of World War I, and he was drafted into a group out of Michigan, and they ended up over in Archangel, which was part of up in Upper Siberia.
Yeah, Murmansk and Archangel.
Yeah, and he was there during World War I, and he tells me it was really cold. At one time he said he had on 11 pairs of socks. And he said these people, where they live, they had these big ovens. I guess they did their baking in and heating their house, and they sort of slept on top of them to keep warm, you know, and all. And he was in that area. He never did say that he was in any skirmishes with, I think they were up there to, involved with the Bolsheviks or something, and all. But that's where he was stationed. And of course, when he came home, he brought a trunk full of objects and all. And of course, my son Michael has created a World War I room here, and Uncle Walter's uniform is on a mannequin, you know, and all.
He was an 80-year member of the Legion Post that we have, the 2 photos of the 2 guys next to the statue.
It's a Funkhauser post. It was the biggest post in close to a lot of places in the United States. So we had 5,000 members. That Funkhauser post was located right by the railroad station. So what would happen during World War II, you get off duty or get out of the railroad track, and they'd pull you over to the Funkhauser and get you drunk, and then you'd sign up and be a member. But probably not your grandfather or your, you know, not him, but that's what happened. But Funkhauser's a big post, but I bet he liked that. I saw that uniform Mike's got displayed. That wouldn't be keeping him warm though up in Siberia. What did he say it was, -10 or -30?
Oh, yeah, probably 30 degrees below up there, you know, as far as they were in Siberia.
Yeah, they were just.
I don't know how close they were to
50 to 100 miles south of the Arctic Circle.
So
yeah,
Did
but
his
you know, you don't realize it, but the people back in World War I were a lot smaller. He was, you know, he was probably all of 5'3" or 4" or something like that. See, and you know.
That's okay.